Good evening and welcome to Are You Afraid of the Dark Web? My name is AJ Fox. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at Maryville University. Thank you to our sponsors of tonight's event, the Simon School of Business, Maryville Office of Development and Alumni Relations, and the National Leadership Council. A little bit of housekeeping this evening. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. And you can ask a question at any time using the Q&A link through the Zoom app. And then we also have two screens available for you this evening. One will be our presenter and PowerPoint, and the other would be the other will be the video of us. And what will happen is on iPhone devices, you'll be able to flip back and forth between the two. On Android, for some reason, you will not be able to. Janelle, if I could get you to come over and help us start the PowerPoint. So tonight's presenter, it's my honor to present Kurt Aubuchon, Assistant Professor of Cybersecurity here at Maryville University. He has more than 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity realm in the corporate private sector, and we are very lucky to have him here at Maryville leading our cybersecurity program. So Kurt, welcome and thank you for your expertise this evening.
Thank you for having me.
So we are here in the Cyber Fusion Center on Maryville's campus, and it is the nerve center of our cybersecurity program. So let's begin tonight and talk a little bit about that cybersecurity program.
Sure. So Maryville University has both undergrad and graduate level cybersecurity programs. Currently we have about 750 students across all levels. We focus on a business-based and experiential learning program so that all of our classes include a heavy lab and hands-on component. One of the real centerpieces of our program is the Cyber Fusion Center, in which students provide real-world services to clients. So the Cyber Fusion Center is not really a class, it's more of an internship or a hands-on kind of experience. And that kind of philosophy really sort of pervades the whole program. So if you're interested in pursuing a master's or undergraduate degree in cybersecurity, please do give Maryville a look.
Absolutely, a world-class program that is 4.5, 5 years old as this industry really gets up off the ground, and educational institutions like Maryville were one of the first folks into that realm to really start providing that degree and that education. And there's 4 or 5 cybersecurity jobs right now for every qualified applicant, just about.
That's correct. So there are nationwide close to 1 million empty cybersecurity jobs. About 4,000, 5,000 of those are right here in the St. Louis area. So there are a lot of jobs open, and it's a really great time to be in the cybersecurity field.
Excellent. So let's talk about why we're here tonight, which is talking about the basics of cybersecurity and protecting yourself. But let's talk about why cybersecurity is important. You shared a stat with me earlier today about the number of devices that are going to be in the world, and I can believe it just with the number of devices that are here in this room.
Yeah, absolutely. In a couple of years, we're projected to have about 30 billion connected devices on the internet worldwide, which is one for about every 4 or 5 humans on Earth. So not only is there a large number of connected devices, but increasingly all of our important data and all business is conducted electronically. So really the store of value going forward across the world is going to be electronic. And it's increasingly important to protect not only individual privacy, but also the security of businesses and any organization that has data, that relies on data to conduct its operations.
And so that's where we're going to start tonight, is personal data protection. And just before we kind of get into that, we talk about why personal data needs protecting, and you had some notes on that are always amazing when I hear them, about kind of what is the most important data to protect and what's the most valuable data for hackers. I think we all think it's our credit card or our social security number, but there's another piece of our private data that is even more sought after and even more valuable to hack.
Yeah, really interestingly, certainly criminals are interested in your credit card number, your name, address, and social. But it's really interesting that so many credit card numbers and so many names, address, and socials have been compromised. There's kind of a glut of those on the underground market. They're really not that valuable anymore. criminals are really more and more after your healthcare records, your medical records actually fetch more on the underground economy than your name, address, and social does. With your medical record, you can do medical billing fraud, you can do prescription fraud and identity fraud. So while you do have to continue to make sure you protect your credit card and your social, you can't focus just on those pieces of information.
Yeah, and it's I was always interested in the reason why your health information is so valuable is because I've always been told because you can't change it, right? We can change our credit card numbers, we can change our address, you can even get a new social security number if you needed to, but we cannot change our personal health history. And so once that is compromised, it's out there forever.
That's correct. And also, because of things like medical billing fraud, someone could create a fraudulent medical bill and charge it to your insurance company. Not only would that be a financial problem, but it would also potentially complicate your medical care going forward, because that might become part of your medical history.
Absolutely. So obviously the stakes are very high, and tonight we want to just start out with a very basic level and give some folks some everyday tips and tricks and pointers that they can use to protect themselves, especially as we encounter more of the online and virtual world through our daily lives, and more of our lives move online. So our first section is protecting your personal data. And the first place we're going to start is the easiest place and the place that we got the most questions about, which is passwords. So talk to us about how we should be structuring our passwords and kind of the important things that we should be cognizant of as we're creating those in the world.
Sure, absolutely. Passwords are the first thing we always think about. And we all have kind of a love-hate relationship with passwords. Everyone hates passwords, but for better or for worse, they're really the main line of defense we have as far as protecting our personal information. For a long time, we gave a lot of kind of conflicting information about how to pick good passwords. And we told people to pick very complex passwords with all kinds of special characters and so on. Really, I think a better way to think about passwords is think of them more as a passphrase than a password. Really focus on having longer passwords rather than more complex ones. If you have an 8 or 9 character password with all kinds of special characters in it, first of all, it's not as secure as a longer password. Also, it's impossible to remember. So pick passwords that are relatively easy for you to type, easy for you to remember, but are good and long. So, take 2 plain old dictionary words and put a couple numbers in between, or 2 or 3 words with a slash in between them, something like that. Easy to remember, easy to type. But if you have a good 15, 16 character long password, it's very, very difficult to crack.
And we always want to be careful about using our passwords on untrusted machines, usually public machines. And I know that you had some kind of, if you do have to encounter one of those situations where you're not using it on a trusted device that is yours personally or at home, what should you do if you do have to log into a secure account through that?
Sure, and we all kind of have those kinds of situations where we're traveling and we have to print off the boarding pass or something, and so you have to use the computer at the hotel's kiosk or something like that. And typically, you want to try to avoid that. You want to try to log in with your phone, something like that. But if you do have to use the hotel kiosk or you have to use the library, something like that, then just make sure you change your password as soon as you can from a trusted device. With machines that you don't control, that you don't trust, at the library, the hotel kiosk, etc., you never know if there's a keylogger on them or kind of what kind of malware is running on them. So, do what you need to do if it's sort of an emergent situation. And then next time you're on your personal phone or your personal device at home, change the password right away.
Absolutely. And then the next level of protection is actually what we're going to talk about next. And that is, as often as we can, use two-factor authentication for your passwords. And so talk to us about what that is and kind of why it gives you that extra layer of protection.
Right. So two-factor authentication is technology where the password alone doesn't actually get you into the website or whatever you're trying to log into. You have to have a second factor, which most often is a cell phone or something like that. So for example, Gmail offers two-factor authentication. So you go to Gmail, you put in your username and password, but then Gmail will send you a second token, like usually a one-time token, to your phone. And then you type that second token into Gmail to log in. And that can come via text message or via a mobile app like Google Authenticator or something like that. And two-factor authentication is really great because it means that if someone does compromise your password, the password by itself is not enough to get into your account. You have to have that actual physical device as well. And so it really goes a long way to prevent unauthorized access to your account.
And that is not usually set up by default, correct? You need to activate that. In some instances it is, but most websites that you have that would offer two-factor, because I know through my Gmail, I currently don't have two-factor authentication. I've got a way to recover it where they'll send a note to my phone, but not just every time I log in. So people will need to go into their settings and activate that if that website allows, correct?
That's correct. And with most sites, it's relatively easy. With Gmail, you just go into the account settings and just literally click a box, and it'll turn it on. You might have to provide your phone number so they can send SMS text messages to you. Your bank and other sites generally will have that option. Some sites may not. It's really important at least to use two-factor authentication on some of your most important resources like your email and your bank, maybe your medical record. Some other things like your Netflix account. Two-factor may not be as critical for that, but you certainly want to use it on your sort of most secure sites. More and more websites are offering that as a service now.
So let's talk about one of the other areas where we got the most questions going into the webinar tonight, and that was password managers. So we know we've got all these passwords that are run out there, especially if we've got two-factor on, we're getting a second layer of security there. But a lot of people wanted to know, is it safe to turn over all of my passwords to another program and another entity and then be able to use that as convenience and security? So talk to us about password managers and if they are kind of a useful alternative to trying to remember or write them all down on Post-it notes and stick them underneath the keyboard.
Right. So password managers are really useful. And, I use a password manager. I use LastPass, but there are a number of other ones out there. And so password managers, what they do is they allow you to create very long passwords that you never have to remember, and the password manager will fill in the passwords for you. So, for example, LastPass, for example, is a kind of a browser add-on, and so I have it on my home machine. When I open up my browser and go to my email or my bank, LastPass fills in the password for me. And so then for example, my bank, my password is something like 25 characters long. I don't even know what it is. I don't have to know what it is. LastPass knows what it is for me. So is it safe, right? And that's a great question. You definitely should research any of the tools that you use, especially the security tools. Password managers like LastPass and some of the other ones that we have on the slide have been pretty well researched and pretty well vetted. LastPass, for example, your passwords are always encrypted when they are stored in the LastPass cloud. And so they only get decrypted when they're on your computer. And so what that means is there's no way for the people at LastPass to actually see your password. And if LastPass itself had a compromise, if someone broke into LastPass database, they wouldn't be able to see your passwords either. So if you use a well-vetted and well-respected password manager, you can really increase your security because you're picking nice long passwords for everything. You can have a different password for every website, and you don't have to worry about remembering all those passwords. You only have the one password to remember.
And I think the most inviting detail for me is that LastPass will actually help you create those passwords, right?
Right.
And so you can just set it, forget it, and then as long as you have it with you on your devices. Now, again, let's say that, well, first things first, that's the castle, right? Then everything that you have is protected in there. And if someone did gain access to your LastPass account, then they would have a vault of all of your passwords. So the one password that you do need to both remember and needs to be incredibly secure is the password to get into your password manager.
That's correct.
Yeah, it does allow you to refocus just into one or a couple passwords to remember, but you got to make sure that the drawbridge is incredibly secure, because if someone does get across, then they're inside the vault of all of your passwords. So that's
exactly.
that's the trade-off in security there.
Exactly. Right.
And as we talked about with entering your passwords on a machine that's untrusted, where we said there you can access it but change your password later on, you pretty much want to avoid ever using your password manager or logging in while on an untrusted machine, correct?
Exactly. Because again, if there's some sort of password, if there's some sort of keystroke logger or something like that on the machine that you're logged into, then they actually sort of get the keys to the castle. So yeah, definitely only log into your password manager from a trusted machine.
So obviously there are people in the world whose passwords get stolen. This happens all the time, even though we have the tips, tricks, and tools to allow us and help us prevent that. So if your password is stolen, it happens a lot. Don't worry about it. Don't feel bad, I think is what you had said to me, which is a good thing, because I think we all feel guilty, or that was something that we did. So talk to us about, what do we do if our password is compromised?
Sure, and you're exactly right. I mean, you shouldn't feel guilty or shouldn't feel ashamed. The password, we call them phishing emails, the emails that are sent by people trying to trick you into divulging your password. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated. They're really very, very convincing. I just received one just this week that there are only a few things that sort of tipped me off that it may have been fraudulent. It was really very, very convincing. So I think the first thing is, if you feel like your password, or if you believe your password has been compromised, then simply change your password from a trusted machine. And if you're using sort of a pattern for your passwords, and I don't typically recommend this, but some people use sort of a pattern where they use a certain kind of base password and then add something onto that password based on the website. If you're using something like that and one of those gets compromised, then you're going to want to change all the passwords that use that same pattern, because then the person could fairly easily sort of reverse engineer your pattern. So if you have if your password's been compromised, then just change your password and kind of go from there. Typically, the websites that try to trick you into divulging your password, typically they're just after your password. They don't typically install malware. So really just a matter of containing the damage of the password exposure.
Making sure you get back into that account and re-secure it as quickly as you can, and again, from a trusted machine, because you don't know exactly where that leak came from.
Exactly.
So we'll touch a little bit on this, but this is a serious situation that you would definitely want to seek some significant advice and protection and help for. But a lot of cyber fears that we have, and some folks have kind of asked questions around, is what happens if my personal identity is compromised? And that can be involved in a number of different ways. It doesn't happen just in the virtual space through cyber attacks, but it can. So real quickly, let's touch on kind of a couple things to do if your identity is compromised.
Sure. So if your identity is compromised, you should contact your financial institutions and make them aware of it. You can do what's called a credit freeze. You can contact the credit bureaus and put on a credit freeze, which means that no one can get credit in your name unless they provide an additional password or additional bit of identifying information. So you can contact TransUnion and Equifax and in those agencies and freeze all of your credit. The good thing is that it makes it so that no one can go and get a loan in your name or buy a car with your credit or something like that. If you are yourself in need of credit, it kind of puts an extra sort of hurdle in front of you, but it may well be worth it. So consider doing something like that. You do generally want to file a police report, and that's not because the police are necessarily going to do a lot about it. The local police probably won't be able to help you out too much, but you do want that record so you can go to your financial institutions and use that to document that your identity was stolen. If you need to do things like put a credit freeze on, or reverse charges, or reverse withdrawals from your bank, that kind of thing. But the main thing is, again, just to call your financial institutions, let them know that your identity has been exposed, and kind of follow their instructions.
Absolutely. So the other piece of protection that some folks have mentioned, and that I was personally curious about and interested to learn, that does not necessarily provide the benefits that I thought it did. Virtual private networks, VPNs, as you'll hear them called. Talk to us about how they fit into the overall kind of cybersecurity picture and what benefits and they do and do not provide.
Sure. And so with VPNs, there's a couple of different sort of types of VPNs. There's the kind of using a corporate network, and then the kinds that most of the viewers are probably interested in are sort of personal VPNs. And a personal VPN really obscures your identity or obscures your location. So when I go to a website, let's say I go to maryville.edu from home, there's a record on Maryville's website, or the web software collects a record saying that I came from a certain IP address. And with some work, that IP address could be used to find out some information about me. And so what a VPN does is it sort of hides that. It substitutes some other IP address for the one that it actually come from. So a VPN really helps to safeguard your privacy and your identity. Doesn't really provide much security benefit. So a VPN doesn't provide any protection against malware. It doesn't provide any protection against sort of phishing emails or against scams. It really only provides sort of pseudonymizes you. It makes you so that your true identity is not revealed to the sites that you visit. And for some of us who are particularly concerned about privacy, that is important. Is also important for people who are perhaps in repressive regimes where they don't want the government to know what they're doing, things like that. For a lot of us, VPN doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. But again, it's important to remember that it's really more of a privacy tool than a security tool.
Absolutely, and I was very interested to learn that. And I guess the idea for me is you see it in the Hollywood movies where they're bouncing those signals back and forth a bunch of different servers and trying to track them back. And essentially, I hope that's my a positive understanding of what a VPN kind of looks like in the real world. So finally here in the personal data protection, let's kind of wrap this section up talking about how do we back up our data, because I think the thing that most of us fear is even not a cyber attack, but the hardware failure, or now we're getting into some cyber attacks with ransomware and other types of malware that would damage your machine and would lose all of your data. I think people are very panicked about losing their years or family history worth of photos or documents, or if you're on a small business that doesn't have an IT firm that's running security, you could lose all of your records. So talk to us about personal data backup options and maybe some what we should be looking for there.
Sure. So there are a number of different ways you can back up your data on your personal devices. One of the sort of simplest ways is just to buy a large capacity USB drive, external hard drive, plug it into your laptop at home, and back up your files to it. That has the virtue of simplicity, relatively inexpensive. The large capacity hard drives are going to be pretty cheap, and it is pretty straightforward. The problem with that is you have to remember to do it. It's generally not automatic. And for our mobile devices, it may be difficult to get those to sync to your hard drive that's in your home or your basement. One option that's probably easier and a little more kind of set and forget is cloud backups, where you can set your devices to automatically copy data to a cloud service like Google Drive or Backblaze or some of the other options we have on the slide. The great thing about those is, again, you can set up the agent that runs on your machine. It backs up things automatically without you having to think about it too much. Some of these do have a cost associated with them, relatively inexpensive. About $60 a year to use some of these tools. And you can usually back up not only your home laptop or desktop or whatever you have, but also your mobile devices. With any of these tools, the thing you want to, I think, mostly worry about is to make sure that encryption is baked in, so that when you back up your data to the cloud provider, it's encrypted before it goes up to the cloud provider. And that's just to guard against any compromise of the cloud provider or any sort of bad actors working at the cloud provider or something like that. So you have your devices set up to automatically back up, but to be encrypted before it transfers to the internet. Things like Google Drive are inexpensive and easy to use. Google Drive doesn't have encryption built in, so you have to kind of do a little finagling to get encryption to work. But it's another option.
Yeah, and the cloud versions give you the portability of your data, where you can access them again on machines from anywhere in the world that you have internet access. But again, you want to make sure two things. One, that password is very secure, or you're using your password manager. And then two, you don't access those drives or backups from an untrusted user. So going back to the things we learned here previously. So that brings us to our second. So we kind of got ourselves in a good spot now, Kurt, with kind of safety procedures as we think about our personal data. Now let's go online and let's talk about some of our online threats that we're going to be encountering when we enter that virtual world. So the first one is, let's walk through some browsing safety tips. So these are just the general rules of the road when we connect to the internet.
Sure. So I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with many of these. Generally, any of those sort of ads or pop-ups that you see online, they're sort of very clickbaity. You'll never guess what happened next, or 7 things you should never do before 8 a.m. or whatever. You can never click on those. I mean, those are not only are they just kind of generally dumb, but oftentimes you have to just click on those and you sort of go to various sites that you weren't intending to. And that's a real good way to find yourself on a site where it's maybe malicious or maybe sort of scammy. So any of those sort of clickbait kind of things, just generally avoid. Any kind of pop-ups, of course. And we've kind of generally known about pop-ups for a while. Generally, they're pretty annoying at best and risky at worst. Sometimes you see those pop-ups are like warnings. Warning, you must take action. Your machine is infected with malware, or this is the FBI, and we need to contact you because of sites you visited or so on. 100% of those are scams. Never click on those. If those pop up, just close them out. They're not generally an indication that you have been compromised. You might get compromised if you click through, but if you see those pop-ups that say, this is tech support and you need to take action because your machine is compromised, just close it and ignore it. And just generally, as you're searching for sites, as you go to Google and search for something or whatever search engine you use, try to take a look at websites, the address, make sure it's a website you somewhat recognize, or if the website has a name that's 175 characters long, that's probably a little bit of an indication that it might not be the most trustworthy. So,
the FBI will show up at your door. They will not send you a pop-up through your web browser.
Exactly, right.
They will knock at your door if they really want to see you. So now that we've got some tips, let's talk about some tools. We had some tools there in the personal data section. So let's talk about kind of the 3 areas, and we'll go a little bit further in depth. But the first one here, I know you are particularly fond of.
Yeah, so not only for browsing, but just sort of in general, really the number one most important thing you can do to protect your security on any of your computers is to install the updates. For not only the operating system, but for any software you use, have them set to automatically update with new security patches. The vast majority of security compromises can be mitigated or blocked by just installing the patches. Criminals generally are exploiting vulnerabilities that we know about and that we have a patch for. So set your operating system, set your applications to automatically patch. And that's, again, the number one thing you have to do.
Excellent. And we've got 2 more. One topic that was the biggest topic that we received questions on heading into tonight's program, and then a second one, which I didn't know about until we started talking and preparing for this. So let's get into it, the big kahuna. Let's talk about antivirus protection. So I'm going to turn over the floor to you and let you walk us through this, because this was the area that folks who are tuning in tonight really wanted to know about.
So antivirus protection is really important. It can block many kinds of threats that come in over email or over your web browser. And if it doesn't actually block them, it can sometimes notify you that the malicious software got on the machine. For the individual, there's really very little need for an individual to ever pay for antivirus. There are plenty of really good, well-respected free tools out there. You might use AVG or Avast or Kaspersky or several other tools. And the way those vendors make their money is they have a free version available for home use, for individual use, and then they charge corporate customers. So those tools are really good for personal use. I happen to use AVG at home, but those other ones are just as good. So, go install one of those free tools. Make sure it's set to automatically update. It should be set by default. When you install it, it should automatically update itself. Generally, antivirus tools are going to update multiple times a day with new signatures so they can catch new kinds of malware. You should set it to do real-time protection, which means that anytime you access a document or anytime you open a document, it scans it. Now, that does create a very small performance impact. Generally, it's not noticeable. So, I have antivirus on all my machines. I never think about it. It doesn't really have a noticeable performance impact. So you really have to have that real-time scanning. because you might get a piece of malware that your antivirus doesn't know about. And then the next day or 2 days later, it gets an update. And so now it knows about that antivirus, or it knows about that piece of malware. And so the next time you access that document, it will throw a warning. So important to automatically update, important to set it to real-time protection. One of the real important things to keep in mind about antivirus is that even though it's important, and even though it's something you should do, it's sort of not the silver bullet. Even really good antivirus systems only catch maybe a third to a half of the malware out there. So it will block a lot of things, but it's really no substitute for good security practices and sort of what we call good security hygiene, which is not clicking on malicious links and being sort of careful about what you open on email, things like that.
So kind of all the other tips and tricks we've talked about tonight form that whole kind of umbrella of security, and the antivirus program is at the heart of it, but it's not everything. And if you're relying only on your antivirus program to keep you safe, and you're off visiting different parts of the scared and dark web, you're going to end up in trouble still, even though you have that antivirus protection. So it's important to kind of practice a holistic view of internet security rather than just putting all your eggs in that antivirus basket.
Exactly.
So let's talk about one more layer of protection that was completely new to me, and that I'm definitely going to investigate after tonight's program, and that is internet filtering. So talk to us about what that is, what it does, and kind of why it's another piece of that security layer.
Sure. So a lot of malware does come over email, right? You'll get a malicious attachment or so on, but a large amount of malware also just comes over the internet, right? Over the browser. So you visit a malicious website that has malware in it. Or in addition to that, malware that you get over email, it's still, once it executes on your computer, it still has to communicate out to the internet. So what you can do is you can use a internet filtering tool that will either block you from, or try to block you from going to malicious websites, or try to block that outbound communication from malware that does execute on your machine. So in the corporate world, we catch a lot of malware because we catch it when it talks out rather than when it gets on the machine. So an internet filtering tool can help both prevent and detect malware. And what an internet filtering tool does is it tries to identify websites or online resources that are malicious, and then simply prevents your computer from talking to them. Another thing internet filtering will do is, if it doesn't know what a website is, if a website is uncategorized, right, it doesn't recognize what it is at all, it may block it. And that can also help really reduce your risk of going to a malicious website. So a lot of us think about internet filtering, a lot of us who have children think about, well, we're going to use internet filtering to block out adult sites and things like that. And that's very important for those of us who have families. But internet filtering is also a real security tool because it blocks a lot of this ugly, malicious stuff on the internet. So you can look at a tool like OpenDNS or like Komodo One, and those will help really reduce your risk online. In fact, here in the Cyber Fusion Center, we use Komodo One for our clients. We're installing that on some of our client computers to protect their environment from online threats.
And that's, again, that great piece of what we do here with our students in protecting those nonprofits is the students are using the real tools that they do in industry. And so when they're ready to walk in that day one, they know, well, we installed, someone who, if they go onto those organizations, can say, oh, we installed this program for you, and then they know exactly how to use it and what it's for. So.
Exactly. And like some of the antivirus tools, OpenDNS and Komodo One and some of those other web filtering solutions are, they make their money by charging corporate customers, but they're free for individual use. So I think you can do a really great, you can really have a good security posture and really have good security practices without really spending very much money at all. Being for the individual.
Yeah, and free is important. I know a lot of people look for that, and to know, I think one of the big things was people were worried that if I'm not paying for it, am I getting the layer of protection that I need? And it sounds like we can do it free. You just want to make sure you're using kind of those trusted sites and those you've done some research, and we've included some of those tonight on the program.
Absolutely.
All right, we are into our third section here, and this is one that I think presents some for you in your corporate line of work, presents some of the more challenging elements of keeping systems and machines safe. And those are threats that come to us via email. So we're going to talk about kind of the two main types of email threats. and those are phishing and password phishing and malware. So talk to us briefly about those two, and then we'll go in depth into it.
Sure. So phishing, sort of traditionally, the definition of phishing was an email that would, or any attempt to get a person, to convince a person or trick a person into divulging their credentials. So you get those emails that appear to come from your email provider or appear to come from your net provider or from your corporate network saying you have to log in to resolve this problem or you have to log in to change your password. And those emails are scams. They're just trying to get you to divulge your password to an attacker. So nowadays, the definition of phishing has kind of morphed a little bit and it's kind of come to mean any kind of malicious email. But I'm kind of a stickler and kind of pedantic, and so I think of phishing just as credential harvesting.
So let's talk about the phishing element and how to counter those phishing emails, because I think we're all taught to kind of try to be the current thinking, and even in some training that I've done at a previous employer, the thought was, to try to play email detective and figure out, as you noted a little earlier, study that email that's come in and try to make sure that you can spot the fakes and pieces of that really identify it as a problematic email. But that is not really the case anymore.
Yeah, so I think the individual can, maybe do some analysis of email, but the phishing emails have gotten so good and they're so convincing that I think it's probably not realistic to expect most people to be able to tell the difference between a phishing email and a real email that might come from your email provider or from your bank or from someone like that. And I mentioned earlier that just this week here at Maryville, I received a phishing email that was incredibly convincing, and I took one of my classes through it and had them try to analyze the email, and we all agreed that it would have been very easy for any of us to fall for it. So, rather than trying to sort of analyze email and play detective, if you receive an email that appears to come from a trusted source, don't click on the link, don't open the attachment, but rather go to that source, by a bookmark or contact their customer service. So, for example, I get an email from my bank. I'm not going to click on the link, but my bank is bookmarked. Right? I have a bookmark in my browser to my bank, so I'll log into my bank through the bookmark. That way, I know I'm going to the bank and not wherever this link may be taking me. So, just go directly to the site or directly to the customer service, or pick up the phone and call the institution to make sure, rather than trying to figure out these phishes, because again, they're just so convincing nowadays that the average person and even a security professional can easily fall for them.
Absolutely, and it's good advice to not have to decide, do it one way and do it the other way. It's a matter of, if you get those emails that you really think or that are trying, because one of the other hooks that they'll try to get is they'll try to impress upon you that this is a time sensitive or that your security is at risk, which is a bit of an ironic twist on those messages. But if that's the case, it's best to have that blanket now. It's something I need to adjust in my personal cybersecurity practices to just say, okay, my bank has sent me an email. I need to go out to that website or to get on the phone and call them, rather than following the convenience, which is why most people do click through those emails. And people are not dumb, as we talked about. They're not just willy-nilly clicking on these. Even folks now who are looking for cyber attacks through email may miss, because the forgeries are getting so good, and the link masking is getting to a point where you really can't trust even your own eyes to tell. Because if the cybersecurity professor here at Maryville is being convinced by some of those emails, I don't stand a chance at home. So get out to that website and do it kind of the long but trusted way.
Absolutely.
And it's pretty similar on the malware threat. So we've got an example, actually a screenshot here of an email that was received here in the Maryville community that had an attachment to it. And it came actually from a member of another institution who I'm sure made the mistake of opening that attachment and had his email compromised, and they used that institution to attack Maryville. And so talk to us about kind of the malware side. Pretty similar in regards to ways to counter those threats?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we used to always tell people, don't open the attachment unless it comes from someone you know. That's really not very good advice anymore, for the reason that you just said, that that person may be compromised, and it's relatively easy for an attacker to compromise someone's email and use that email to send the same attack to all their Or we would tell people, try to read the email and get a sense for if it sounds right. And again, the emails are getting so convincing, that's really not a very good piece of advice anymore either. So I think that maybe the better advice is don't open the attachment or click on the link unless you were expecting that specific thing. If you had a separate conversation with the person, either by phone or in person, or whatever, and that person said, hey, I'm going to send you X, Y, Z, and then you get X, Y, Z later on in the day, that's a pretty good indication that it's for real. But if it's just something that you just you receive out of the blue, you weren't expecting, it's a good indication that maybe it's not legitimate. And if you want to be sure, then you pick up the phone and call the person, right? Again, in the corporate world, we get this a lot where someone will send an invoice to accounting, and accounting has to stop and think, well, this is our vendor, right? Do we do any work with these people? And then pick up the phone and call them and say, you sent us this invoice, is this for real? Before you open it. So just, again, unless you were expecting that specific thing, at least double check before you.
I know personally, and this has been a number of years, but I had received emails kind of presenting itself for being from UPS, and it had an attachment that was the tracking information. I had not ordered a package, but of course, now as more and more of our commerce goes online, you may lose track. And so that's another way that just make sure that you line up kind of the emails that you're expecting and the conversations or interactions you're having with different vendors who are sending those emails. And it's easy to fall for them, and once you do, kind of you got malware on the machine. So let's go into, we've tried to do everything right, but something went wrong or something got through, and now my device is infected. So talk to us about kind of how we work through and what steps we can take to restore ourselves where we were before.
Sure. And again, similar to phishing, if you do fall for a malware attack, it's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed by, because again, they are getting very sophisticated, and especially attacks that come over the web browser, it's very easy to stumble across those. So with any kind of malware, first of all, hopefully you have backups. Hopefully you have your data backed up, to a cloud service or to an external hard drive, something like that. You should try to seek assistance from perhaps where you bought the machine from, or through the vendor who provided the operating system, something like that. It's really difficult to clean malware off the machine. I remember early in my career, I spent a lot of time trying to clean PCs and then turn them to service, right? Trying to remove the malware with all these utilities and all this sort of manual work. And it's just really cleaning malware is not worth the effort, and also is very difficult to actually be sure that you got all of it. Malware does a really good job of getting hooks into a system now, and you can think that it's clean, but it can easily get reinfected. So if your PC has been infected with malware, sort of once you've lost trust in it, it's really best to rebuild it from scratch. That actually, in the long run, is less painful than trying to clean. So hopefully you've got backups. You can go to where you purchased the machine from, or if you have a restore disk, something like that, restore it back to the factory settings, the way it was when it came out of the box, and then rebuild it. That's going to make you lose a day or so of work, but it's going to be better than to keep getting reinfected over and over again.
Absolutely. So we've reached the end of that section there, and our last one before we get to Q&A tonight, just wanted to talk about some cyber myths, and you had a couple of them that you put together and kind of thought were good and kind of do float around pretty often. So I use this operating system, and I'm that operating system doesn't get viruses like those others or this or that. And so is that true? Is there a perfect operating system out there that we should all switch to immediately because it's uncompromisable?
No, not at all. Different operating systems provide different sort of security benefits and a different, we call it an attack surface, but provide a different sort of security environment. But there's no such thing as perfect security, no matter what operating system or what tools you're using. There's no such thing as, I'm using this particular firewall or this particular antivirus, and so I'm safe. Different tools and different operating systems can provide different security benefits, but it still really comes down to having good practices, good habits, being sort of thoughtful, think before you click, being sort of thoughtful about what you open up and where you know, in email and web and so forth. So the tools that you use are again, as you said, there's no such thing as perfect security. None of them are going to be sort of you know, impervious to compromise. So you still have to, again, be thoughtful about how you're using them, be thoughtful.
And there was one difference we talked about early on, which was I was kind of curious about it. I think some folks would be as well. Mobile devices are generally a little bit more secure than our PCs at home, and talk to us about kind of why that is.
Sure. So a couple different reasons. One is that mobile devices, is primarily Apple, but Android devices as well, sort of provide kind of a gatekeeper for the apps that are available. So again, with Android, you can get apps from lots of different third-party sources. With Apple, you have to get apps from Apple. But if you get apps from the Google Play Store or from the Apple Store, there is at least some amount of vetting that goes into that before those apps are made available. You shouldn't rely entirely on that, but there is some that is helpful. Also, the way mobile devices handle security, the way they sort of containerize or sandbox things provides a little bit of protection. Also, with most of our mobile devices, we don't have what's called root access. We have kind of a lower level of access to the device than we do with our PCs. So mobile devices tend to be a little more secure. There's mobile malware out there. There are malicious apps in the App Store, but they're not quite as sort of prevalent or as damaging as they are in the PC world or the laptop.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest cyber security concern you have with your mobile device is losing the physical device, right, and not having a way to protect it or having folks gain access to it at that point.
Right, and for that, you know, if you opted to encrypt the device, and if you're using like biometrics, then generally you may have lost the device, but it's going to be pretty much a brick to cover still or never fix that.
So the second one is very interesting. I think this comes from both from Hollywood and a very prominent politician has actually, I think, made this accusation, and that is that hackers are all these kids in their mom's basement just kind of messing around, and it's just generally these bad actors who are out there kind of doing this as a side hobby for kicks or to disrupt the system. Is that an accurate portrayal of kind of the cyber threats that we really face on an everyday basis?
No, not at all. You know, there are people like that out there, I'm sure. I think there are sort of the traditional, you know, we call them script kiddies, or, you know, people who are not very skilled and they're just sort of poking around. And they may or may not live in a mom's basement. But the real threats we're worried about nowadays are actual professional criminals. They are skilled and serious actors who really their job is, you know, they all day, every day, they work at hacking into things. So, you know, while the sort of traditional hacker is probably still out there, you know, the people who broke into Equifax or the people who, you know, do all of these sort of major breaches, they're skilled, dedicated professional hackers. Which again is back to what I said earlier, that it's really very difficult for the individual to, you know, to defend themselves against that. It's difficult for the individual to spot their emails if the professional hacker who thinks about this all day for a living, they just send it out.
So we've got time for a few questions and answers before we have to wrap up tonight, and we have a couple of great questions. The first one was about that data backup to the cloud using those providers, and someone wanted to know about whether or not the data is safe and whether or not those organizations are collecting that data or mining that data while they're doing that, and how do they ensure privacy with those cloud providers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you guys have mentioned Google Drive, for instance, is not encrypted. And that's how Google makes their money, is by mining data and presenting ads to you, right? So if you are concerned about privacy, then you have to keep that in mind. With some of the other providers, though, some of the backup providers, what the option that you have and what you should choose is to encrypt the data on your machine before you transmit it to the cloud. And so, for example, you know, back Blaze and some of those other tools that we mentioned, they charge you, usually it's $6 a month, something like that, a few bucks a month. And they charge you because they're not mining your data to present ads to you. So they have to make their money some other way. So you can have your data before it gets backed up, is encrypted on your local machine, and then is not transmitted to the cloud provider until it's decrypted. And so that helps to not only protect your privacy, also if the cloud provider themselves have a data breach, if some bad person gains access to that data store, they won't be able to access your data because it will have been encrypted on your machine before being transmitted.
Absolutely. So next question is around smart home devices. So I know I have a lot in my home, and more and more our house is going to be both part of our home network and controlled by devices with different processes. And so talk to us about securing those devices and making sure that someone doesn't hack in and take over your whole house.
Sure. So yeah, those devices are a lot more and more common. People have webcams and things like that. You might have sort of an afternoon nanny or something, so you have a webcam to keep an eye on the kids and the nanny and so on. So those are all really useful tools. It's important to remember that out of the box, those are not really designed to be secure. They're designed for convenience rather than for security. So they're going to come out of the box with like a default password that everyone in the world will be able to know. And they're going to come out of the box with really not very good security controls implemented. So make sure that you're, again, doing your research, make sure that you are reading the manuals and reading the online reviews of these tools, and that first of all, you change the default password so that it's not just, admin and password is the password. And you want to make sure you set those to update too. Just like any other computer, those tools need to update themselves. So those are the two main things. And then I think just generally kind of give some thought to whether you really need that smart device. I think there's some convenience in a lot of these tools, but I don't particularly need to see the contents of my refrigerator for more. Maybe it's something you can avoid to reduce your risk. But for things that, like those webcams, if you set it up, if you just take it out of the box and plug it in, it's going to have the default password. The default passwords are widely known, and then people will be able to look into your house. So give some thought to how you implement those, change the default password, set them to automatically update, and at least those two things.
So we got time for one more question, and we're going to go old school with it, and that is credit card skimmers, or we can kind of broadly talk about kind of credit card fraud and how your credit card gets exposed. So are the skimmers still a real threat that you have to be watching out for at the ATM or the gas pump? And then, what are the other ways that credit cards generally become compromised?
Yes, the credit card skimmers are still a real threat. They're cheap for criminals to use, they're effective, and they are, like everything else, getting a lot more sophisticated. So definitely that's still a way that people can get credit cards. So if you're going to go to the gas pump or the ATM or something, you can kind of tug on it, I suppose, to see if it's a skimmer. I'm not sure how effective that is. I think luckily the financial institutions are getting better and better at identifying fraudulent activity. And so generally the financial institutions and the credit card issuers are getting better at stopping that. I think the main thing is just to watch your statements, watch your bank statements, watch your credit card statements. And if something on there that you didn't order or something you didn't buy, make sure you talk to your financial institutions. And they're getting really good about reversing those charges. I mean, the bad thing is the financial institution has to eat it. The good thing is that the individual doesn't have to. So credit card skimmers, yes, definitely still a thing. The other way that credit cards are compromised is by these sort of big mega breaches where someone breaks into some payment processor or some retail location like Target or something like that.
Schnucks we had here in St. Louis, so big breach in the last few years.
Right. And then of course, there's not much the individual can do about that, right? The bad guy steals all the credit cards, the financial institutions become aware, they have to eat the cost, and they issue a new card. So not a lot you can do about that. With skimmers, sure, give the thing a tug. You may or may not, find one. If you find one, though, it's pretty cool.
And make sure to report it. And definitely don't stick your credit card in that machine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely do report that.
Well, I think that's it for both our time tonight, but do you have any other thoughts to share with us or anything to wrap up this evening?
No, I don't think so. I think, Well, I guess maybe just kind of what we talked about earlier. I think there are some simple and low cost or maybe no cost options that every individual can use to increase or to improve their security posture. And none of this stuff is source free. Anybody can learn this stuff. Anybody can find out about this stuff. So no need to really be afraid if you just sort of put a little thought into what you're doing and do a little research on some of these tools and some of these good practices.
Well, I want to say thank you again, Kurt, so very much for your time over the last couple of weeks and this evening and helping us and walking us through. It's incredibly important, and we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, the stakes here. Your data is worth it for people to try to get it, and they do. And so that's why this is so important to take these basic steps for protection. And of course, if you want to go beyond that, continue to do some research on your own. And if you have questions, I'm sure if you're willing to have folks, we can open it up to allow folks to ask you some questions. And if you're interested again in studying about cybersecurity and learning about how to diagnose and prevent or then go after and figure out how to kind of counter these measures, definitely check out Maryville University's cybersecurity program. It is incredible. We have wonderful folks like Kurt who will walk you through and get you to that place where you can then have a pick of one of a million jobs that are currently unfilled that need you and need your skills. Thank you again also to our hosts this evening and our sponsors. Those would be the Development and Alumni Relations Department here at Maryville, the Simon School of Business, and the National Leadership Council who helped put on all of these events. I would say if you did have a good time tonight and you did learn something, please consider supporting the Alumni Relations Department and allowing us to do more of these activities throughout the year. The donation is on your screen. It's maryville.edu/give. And then also at the end of this meeting, you should see a link to a survey, and it's take about a minute long, and it will help us both understand how the audience participation and the viewership experience was tonight and prepare to do more of these in the future. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful evening, and we appreciate you being part of it tonight.
Thank you very much.